process for obtaining a J2 visa and how does it depend on the J1 visa holder?
Everything that applies to the J1 applies to the J2 visa holder as well.
Is the length of stay for J2 visa holders directly tied to the J1 visa holder status?
Correct. The J2 visa status is directly tied to the J1's visa status. So if a J1 is issued for 4 months, the J2 would also be for 4 months.
Like, can J1 and J2 visa holders study in the US? And if yes, then what are the specific requirements?
There's definitely a lot of benefits to.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. I'm your host Sam, and today we have a very special guest with us who has joined us for the very first time. And before announcing that, I would directly go to our important disclaimer. By watching our videos, you agree and understand that the information provided by our experts and attorneys, including comments and replies from users, is not legal advice. So, use of information is at your own risk. So, viewers, I would like to say that today it's going to be a very special episode. Who the guest who has joined us today for the very first time, and I'm thrilled to introduce Attorney Poonam Gupta, who is a renowned immigration attorney with 25 years of experience in the immigration field. And let me tell you that she also has experience in intellectual property and litigation. So, Poonam, first of all, a very warm welcome to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. And I would say that it's really an honor to have a show with you. And thank you so much for being a part of Immigration and Jobs Talk Show.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here and looking forward to an exciting discussion.
Of course, sure. We would definitely have a very insightful and exciting discussion. Poonam, as this is your first time on our show, so I would like to know that how you're feeling right now.
I'm feeling pumped, great, and excited to help people understand more about immigration.
Wow, that's great. So, as this is your first time, so could you please take a moment to introduce yourself and share a bit about your background and experience in immigration law?
Sure. I grew up in India and then moved to the US. I practiced in India for a few years and then moved to the US. And I've been here 25 plus years. And I started in immigration, went down to do some litigation, and then came back to immigration about 14 years ago. And I've been doing immigration, US business immigration exclusively for that time. And in that time, I have advised clients in all industries, all sizes, all stages of their development, from starter to startups to multinational Forbes 50, Forbes 10 corporations. So I've seen the entire gamut and pretty much everything there is to see on the US business immigration side. But US immigration being what it is, there's always things that we learn, even today, even after 25 years. Every single day, there is something new to learn. There's some nuance that is, we haven't seen before and we see again and again. So it's always exciting.
Wow, that's so good. So, Poonam, as an immigrant, was it challenging for you to shift from India to USA or was it easy for yourself?
Being an immigrant is never easy. Immigrants face a lot of hurdles, face a lot of challenges, and it's an emotional roller coaster for most immigrants because they're leaving behind things that they grew up with, things they're comfortable with, into a completely unknown culture, completely different culture. And in US, it is even worse because compared to what we grew up in India, coming to the US is a culture shock in some ways, but in other ways, the nuances of the society, the etiquettes, and so on are very, very different. So it was a challenge, but I think I've assimilated fairly well and become fairly comfortable. And my goal is to help other immigrants and ease their journey as best as I can. That's why I'm in this business and I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I was about to ask that only that because of these challenges that you face, that's why you decided to become an attorney to help others, and you just now you answered that.
Yes,
All right.
definitely.
Yeah, well, that's a great start, I would like to say. And our viewers also know you, and that's really great. So I hope that this is just a start of many more great conversation together.
Yes, for sure.
Of course. Okay, all right. So, Poonam, I would like to just directly jump into today's topic. That today session is about, can J1 and J2 visa holders legally work in the US? Explanation by none other than Attorney Poonam Gupta. So let's directly ask our first question. So, Poonam, let's start with the basic understanding of today's topic. Like, can you please explain what are the key differences between J1 and J2 visas?
Sure. J1 is the primary person who's being sponsored to come to the United States, and J2 are any of their dependents. Dependents under US immigration law are defined as spouse and children under the age of 21. Dependents are not parents, uncles, aunts, or any extended family or grandparents. It's simply spouse and kids under the age of 21. J1 holders, depending on what they are coming to do in the US, and there are several categories of J1s. They could be working, studying, any of those things. And J2 have to be individually sponsored by the J1 sponsor as well. Unlike some of the other categories, like for instance in H1 or L1, the dependents can apply for their visas simply on the basis of the principal applicants or the principal immigrants' documentation. For J2s, that is not the case. They need to be sponsored separately, and they need their own separate DS 2019.
All right. That's great. So, Poonam, let's move ahead with our second question that I would like to ask, that what is the process for obtaining a J2 visa and how does it depend on the J1 visa holder? What can you say on that?
Absolutely. As a dependent on the J1 visa holder, everything that applies to the J1 applies to the J2 visa holder as well. As I said previously, each J2 dependent has to be sponsored separately by the J1 sponsor. The J1 sponsor has to issue a Form DS 2019 for each J2 applicant, and then the J2 applicant applies for a visa at the US consulate directly. And they can either with the J1 holder or after the J1 holder, like most other categories, you know, it's directly dependent. So whenever the J1 status ends, the J2 status will also end.
Now, I would like to talk about program duration and stay. That how long can J1 visa holders stay in the US, and does this duration vary by program type?
Absolutely. So there are many different program types. J1 is one of the most versatile programs the US Department of State administers. It could be for as short a duration as a couple of months. For camp counselor or summer work travel, the maximum is 4 months in those cases, up to 5 to 7 years if someone is coming to do research or be a physician in the US. So depending on the program type, the length could be a few months to a few years. And I can go into those details if you want later, but that's the broad brush.
All right. Okay. So, Poonam, what can you say? That is the length of stay for J2 visa holders directly tied to the J1 visa holder status?
Correct. The J2 visa status is directly tied to the J1's visa status. So if a J1 is issued for 4 months, the J2 would also be for 4 months. And the critical thing to note here, similar to F1, when the F1 or a J1 enter, or J2 for that matter, enter the United States, their I-94 document will not have a definite end date. It will say D/S, which stands for duration of status. The end date on their application of their stay is actually on the form DS 2019, and that is something that defines the period of stay that is permissible. So the DS 2019 is the controlling document for the J1s and the J2s.
So, Poonam, what can you say about work and study opportunities? Like, can J1 and J2 visa holders study in the US? And if yes, then what are the specific requirements?
So the J1, depending on what they are coming to the US to do, that will dictate what they're permitted to do, whether they are study. If they're coming here to do a university program, for instance, then obviously they're coming here to study and they can definitely study. Can they work alongside it? If they're coming to study, then potentially they could work. Their the J sponsor would be able to guide them on what the parameters are for their work in the US. So they could engage in academic training, which is similar to the optional practical training that F1s have, or and the academic training could be during their course of study, it could be after the course of study, and the duration of that would change. Moving to J2s, J2s can study part time, full time while they are in the US, and they can also work while they are in the US. And the only requirement, unlike some of the other visa categories, is they need to apply for an employment authorization document from USCIS before they can work. But they can study without anything further, just by basis of their J2 status.
All right. So, Poonam, as you mentioned right now about the academic opportunities and academic journey, I would like to ask from you that I noticed that you started your academic journey with a BSc in zoology from Delhi University, right? But
Correct.
later you pursued an LLM from New York University. So I'm really curious to know that how you shifted your zoology, I mean, career from then to LLM. I mean, what was the journey? Was there some experience or incident happened that changed it, or what it was?
Sure. So I had my heart set on going to med school in India, but as you know, med school is extremely competitive. And I wanted to be in the cutting edge of technology, whatever it was. I finished my zoology degree and enrolled in the master's program and realized that very quickly realized in my master's program that that was not how I wanted to spend my life. I could not see myself in a lab working with, you know, on working on experiments in isolation. For me, helping people and being out there and doing things with people is important. So I pivoted to law. My dad's a lawyer, and I got his advice. And he'd never pushed me to pursue law, but he was pleasantly surprised and happy that I thought about law. And I went into law in Delhi. I did my LLB in Delhi and then practiced in Delhi. I practiced intellectual property law at a top firm in Delhi for many years before I came to the US. And then in between my law in Delhi, I went to Cambridge on a full scholarship to do a master's there. And then when I moved to the US, I got a scholarship to study at NYU and did my master's to take the New York bar. So, and then when I came to the US, the immigration piece just pivoted and changed everything for me. And I found my true passion in immigration.
That's really great. Finding your passion gives you so much happiness, and that's so good to hear it from you. I must say that. All right. So, Poonam, I would just like to share with our viewers that, guys, if you are navigating the intricacies of visa applications or facing any legal challenges or simply need just guidance on the latest immigration policies, then please contact Attorney Poonam Gupta. You can also email her on info@summit-legal.com. And for sure, visit our website www.summit-legal.com. All right. Now, moving ahead, and if I want to talk about career impact and opportunities, then how can holding a J1 visa enhance the career prospects in the home country after completing a program in the US?
There's definitely a lot of benefits to doing a J1 in the US. One is international experience and exposure to a US work culture and practice, which is a very professional environment, unlike a lot of countries, not all, and definitely not in the Western world, but some of the other countries where even though the environment may be professional, the US work culture is very different. So getting exposure to that is a huge plus in my view, having worked in India and in a very professional environment. The level of professionalism in India compared to the UK, where I also worked, compared to the US, I would say the US has the most professional of all environments among the three. So that I think is a huge plus. And then the second is in this global economy, having a global network, coming to the US and connecting to people from different backgrounds is invaluable invariably. And no matter what you do, there are ways in which you can leverage your connections in different countries and in the US to grow in whatever industry you are in when you go back to your home country. And obviously, because you're coming to the US on a J1, there are some skills or some knowledge that you're seeking to gain by coming to the US. You'll obviously gain those as well. So, depending on the motivation behind that J1, those are the top three things that come to mind.
Thank you so much, Poonam, for your detailed answer. And let's move ahead with my another question that I would like to ask. That is, how can J2 visa holders leverage their time in the US to build professional networks or gain work experience despite restrictions?
So there are actually limited restrictions on J2. J2 is one of those categories where they are allowed to work as soon as they receive their employment authorization document from the government. The only restriction they have is during the time that they're waiting for that work authorization papers to come through. Once they have that, they can do whatever they want. They can start their own business. They can work for anyone for as long as they want. They can work for multiple employers. There are no restrictions on that. So obviously, applying for work authorization is great because working in any industry or any area gives you the leverage and the experience that simply being on the fringes does not. So I would encourage all J2 holders to, and that is only spouses. The kids cannot work on it as a J2. Only spouses can work as J2. So they should definitely leverage their time and apply for work authorization. While they are waiting, they can definitely enroll in some schools. And these days, networking opportunities abound. No matter what city you are in the US, there is some group, some event, networking event that you can be a part of. So I would highly encourage everyone to go out and network and find people who share your passion that can help you grow together. And it's always beneficial. Last but not least, they can volunteer. I recently posted on LinkedIn about volunteering and the pitfalls surrounding those. So I would encourage everyone to look at that. In summary, volunteering is something that is for an organization or a role that is purely a volunteer role. It is not a role that is meant to displace any paid work. So those are just some opportunities, some options to keep in mind. But there's the world is open to J2s.
Right. Okay. So far, so good, Poonam. Now, moving ahead with the next question that I would like to talk about work authorization for students on J1. So, can you please explain that what work authorization options are available to students on a J1 visa?
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, J1 visa holders are eligible for work authorization. Most of them, and again, depending on what visa category they're coming, or sorry, what program they're coming for, most of them are for work or getting trained while they work. So, somebody who's coming in as a college or university students, they have ability to work on campus or before during their coursework, after their coursework, as part of their academic training. If they are coming in as a researcher or a scholar, again, those are work study or working options, and they would be working and being trained accordingly. Then the interns and trainees also are programs where somebody's coming into the US to intern at a host company and work at that company, or trainee will train at a company. So they will be working. Work is part of what they are getting, and they get trained while working. So the only category of J1s that need work authorization are the students and the academic training. Most others are working and training simultaneously.
Great, great. Okay, so how can J1 students apply for work authorization while maintaining their student status? What can you say on that?
Sure. So J1 students go to their J1 sponsor and seek work authorization. It is an endorsement on their DS 2019, and sometimes they may require an employment authorization document from the government, but any work authorization has to be approved by the program sponsor. For scholars, that is, for J1 students, that would be the form of academic training, and that academic training can be before they complete their program or during their program. Sorry, when I say before, I meant while they are in their academic program, or they can do it after, at the end of the academic program, similar to optional practical training for F1 students. So they will need authorization from the program sponsor in summary.
All right. Thank you, Poonam, for your answer. Now, let's move ahead and shed our lights on visa extensions and transitions. So, what can you say, Poonam, on this? That what is the process for extending a J1 visa, and under what circumstances can an extension be granted?
So most programs have a limited duration, and the program sponsor, and if, say, for instance, for trainees or interns, the maximum duration is 12 months to 18 months. If the program is completed in that time, then great. If there is additional time required, then the program sponsor is the only one that can decide whether or not they will grant that extension. So if the host company requests that they need additional time for that additional program to be completed, they apply for, or the J1 applicant applies to the program sponsor with supporting documents and explanation for why they need additional time. Then the sponsoring organization will issue an updated DS 2019 indicating the extended period. Most of the time, when a person is extending their J1 program, they do not need a authorization from the government, from USCIS. They simply need an updated DS 2019, and that is sufficient. But if they're going to switch from one visa category to another visa category, so say from an academic J1, they want to switch to a research J1, then that is a different category, and a different program sponsor will approve the J1. In that case, they will need to go to USCIS and request that extension and update. But if they're simply extending, the program sponsors issuance of a new DS 2019 will suffice.
Great. So, Poonam, my next question to you is that can J1 visa holders transition to another visa type, such as H1B or a green card?
Technically, yes, they can. The big restrictor for most individuals is if they are, whether or not they're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. How will you know whether you're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement? There are two places to look. One is your DS 2019. Program sponsors will mark on the form on page 1 whether or not you're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. Or when you apply for your visa at the consulate, on the visa itself, there would be an annotation subject to 212E, 2-year home residency requirement. If you have either of those, and sometimes there are mistakes, sometimes you're not subject, but the officers may make a mistake. But if you have any of those annotations, you are subject to 2-year home residency requirement. What is the 2-year home residency requirement? It means that you have to go back to your home country for at least a period of 2 years cumulatively. It doesn't have to be together, but over a period of time, you have to go back home for 2 years cumulatively before you can come to the US in H1B, L1, or a green card. So that is critical and important. And can they transition to other visa types? Yes, there are lots of options. They can transition to F1, H1, L1, O1, E1, E2, green card from family based or whatever. But depending on what the criteria is and whether or not they're subject to the home residency requirement, whether they can switch to that status will be dependent on that annotation.
All right. So, Poonam, my next question to you is that are there options for J2 visa holders to change their status to another visa type while in the US?
Yes, they have the same options as a J1, and a lot of them do all the time. They are also subject to the same home residency requirements as the J1 because they're dependent of that J1. So, for instance, an Indian national is subject to a home residency requirement, but a German national may not be. So, an Indian married to a German, the German gets a J2, they will be subject to. If they had applied for a J1 on their own, they may not have been, but because they're applying as a dependent of an Indian, they would be subject to the home residency requirement. And until they complete that, they would not be able to move forward to that. So, same restrictions, same options, same everything. Just be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Poonam, for your answer. Now let's talk about two-year home residency requirement. So the two-year home residency rule can be a major hurdle. So what creative solutions have you seen for J1 visa holders wanting to stay in the US longer?
So, most people think you can apply for an H1B after a J1. USCIS does not like that. USCIS wants the J1 visa holders to go back to their home country and apply the skills that they've learned in the US in their home country. One option is to apply for a waiver if waiver is available, or switching or doing consular processing. So, I mean, you cannot switch to an H or an L from within the US or outside the US if you have a home residency requirement. But if you have a home residency requirement, you can apply for an O1 outside the US. You can go to the consulate, apply for an O1, and come back. But if you want the green card, before you are able to get the green card, you have to go back home for 2 years or get a waiver for the 2-year home residency requirement before you can get the green card.
And how does the waiver process for the 2-year residency requirement work, and what compelling reasons can support a waiver request?
So there are five statutory bases for a waiver. The first is a no objection statement. So the home country for the J1 applicant has to provide a no objection, that they have no objection to granting the waiver. And if they give that no objection, then the person can apply for a J1 waiver with the Department of State and then, if needed, with the USCIS. If there is a US government agency that is interested in the work that the J1 applicant is doing, then they can request a waiver to keep the J1 person in the US in the public interest. Number three is persecution. If the J1 visa holder would face persecution on account of race, religion, or political opinion if they return to their home country. I imagine if that is the case, then they would also potentially qualify for or apply for asylum. Then the fourth is extreme hardship to the US citizen's spouse or child. And if they're married to a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, then they may also have other pathways open to them, but they would still need a waiver. And the last is the Conrad State 30 program. This is for J1 physicians who work in medically underserved areas for a specific period of time. And then the way this works is, the most common way is requesting a no objection certificate from the government, from the home government, and using the documents, including the no objection certificate and any other documents that the Department of State requires, including the form DS3035, and submitting it to the Department of State. Once the Department of State approves, they send the recommendation for the waiver to USCIS. In some cases, there may be a need to file the Form 612 with the government, but in most instances, it is not required.
So, Poonam, after learning so much, why don't we shed our lights on the future trends? So, what can you say that with this evolving immigration policies, what changes do you foresee for the J1 and J2 visa categories? And could we see more leniency or new opportunities in this?
Um, Sam, this is an election year in the United States. So, depending on which administration is in power next, we could see an immigration friendly administration or an anti-immigration administration. And depending on where they are and what their priorities are, for an immigration friendly administration, we could see efforts to simplify and expedite the J1 visa process, reduce the bureaucratic hurdles and processing times, potentially expanding the program categories to include high demand areas like STEM, or updating the 2009 skills list, enhance support for waivers, and so on. There are a lot of areas they could do good in. Or they could remove the requirement for J2s to require an EAD. This is just one example. But on the flip side, if the administration is not immigrant friendly, then we could see heightened security and denials. They could be increased scrutiny of J1 applications, more rigorous vetting processes. There could be reduction in program categories that could be restricted or eliminated. And I would think the interns, trainees, or the au pair programs may be reduced or eliminated. There could be stricter enforcement of compliance. There could be limitations on waivers, increased processing times, and so on. So Immigration is very dependent on the administration and administration priorities.
All right. So, Poonam, as you mentioned about the election, now my next question would be like this only. That do you think that there really will be a mass deportation, as Trump says about it?
It's a soundbite. Whether it is something that can actually be enforced and whether the government has the resources to execute on something like that remains to be seen. I remain skeptical, but we don't know the extent to which any government will go in promoting the anti-immigrant sentiment. So I can't say anything more than that. I think it's just wait and watch.
Yeah, because Trump is completely unpredictable. You never know with him, right? What he does, what is his next step? Completely unpredictable.
Correct.
So, Poonam, do you think that the J1 visa program will expand to include new industries or sectors, especially with the rise of remote work?
Again, I think this is dependent on the administration that's going to be in power next time around. It could, but the remote work is actually being curtailed in the United States more and more. More and more companies want their employees to be back in office full time, similar to pre-pandemic. But we'll see.
All right, all right. So I think we have covered great amount of questions till yet. And Poonam, one more last question that I would like to ask from you: that have you encountered remarkable cases where J2 visa holders successfully transitioned to their own independent visa status, and what made their journey stand out? Please tell our viewers about this.
Yes, actually, I do have one. So I had a client who was the head for a nonprofit organization. She was on a J2 status and was able to transition to an H1B and has made her life in the United States and is successfully, charting new territories in the United States after pivoting to H1B and getting her green card. Um, it's just for me seeing women come out of their from behind their dependent status and building on it and making something of their professional journey and not delegating their professional journey to their spouses and their partners is always inspiring and empowering. And I like to support as many as I can in that sense. So this J2 holder was, it's the story is really near and dear to my heart, and I am very proud of her.
Wow, that's so good. I mean, but I would say that after hearing these stories, many of the people are going to inspire from you and they are definitely going to keep you as an idol. So it's really good to hear these things from you. So, Poonam, it was really great having you. But before wrapping up, I would like to ask that any last message you would like to give to our viewers about who are applying for J1 and J2 visas?
I would just say be mindful of the 2-year home residency requirement and work around it and plan for it. There are people who come from India who come just for the summer program in high school or in college because they want that experience of being in the US and don't realize that they're stuck with a 2-year home residency requirement. So please read your papers, please read the immigration documents carefully and educate yourself and be proactive about your immigration journey. Don't let somebody else dictate it for you. It's your life. Take charge of it. Thank you.
And also to our viewers, I would like to say that, guys, please contact Poonam so that doesn't matter that whether you are just applying for the visa, but even if you're navigating the intricacies of visa application or facing any legal challenges or just simply needs guidance on the latest immigration policies, then please feel free to contact Attorney Poonam Gupta on the given contact details that I would like to read out. Her email ID is info at summit-legal.com and her website is www.summit-legal.com. So that's all I would like to say. And finally, Poonam, I would just want to say that it was truly appreciating you having on the show, and it was so good. And I would love to have more and more shows with you. It was so good. And anything that you would like to say to our viewers?
No, I think this is great. You're doing a great service to all immigrants in helping them learn about themselves. And as I said, no two immigration cases are the same. So please do not try to apply anything that you hear in any video to your situation. It may seem like it's identical, but it's unlikely. It may be similar, but it's unlikely to be identical. So please, to the extent you can confirm with information from the government website, great. Otherwise, consult with an immigration attorney that you trust and go forward and take charge of your immigration journey. Good luck.
So, thank you, Attorney Poonam Gupta, and also to our viewers. And I would just like to say that in case if you have any questions or want to connect with Poonam, please feel free to contact her on the given details. And also stay informed by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the Immigration and Jobs Talk Show for more updates. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I'm Sam signing off for now. Thank you.